This video is about making custom orthotics for the high arch rigid foot. Let's start out by having a look at a high arch foot. So this is a 3D scanning image, and you can see the position of the calcaneus. It's rather straight up. Now we're going to look at when they are walking, and you can see that we have a couple of hot spots here. So as you've seen from the electronic data that we captured, there were some hot spots and some problems with this very high arch foot. One of the problems with a high arch foot is that it's not actually a good shock absorber, and they can tend to get arthritis through the midfoot because it is a high arch and it's getting a lot of torque. If you could try to remember that when you're walking, it's 3 to 5 times your body weight. And when you're running or jumping, it can be 8 times your body weight. So that's a lot of force that you're asking through this midfoot here. So what we're going to do right now is the biomechanic exam in order to tell the lab what kind of orthotics that we want. So this is a lot of detailed measurements within the foot. The goal is to bring the earth to the foot to optimize the physics of the foot and the foot on the leg. So we're going to start out by looking at the calluses and seeing where this person is getting too much shear forces. It's going to vary from person to person, and we know that this MTP number 1 is really getting a lot of hit from the F scan, so we know that we're going to relieve that, but he doesn't actually have any calluses there. So let's look and see what kind of motion there is to see how this can move out of the way when he's walking. And it is a semi-rigid joint, so this is not able to move out of the way when he's putting his foot down. So what we're going to need to do is relieve that in the orthotic. Kind of an interesting piece of trivia here is that if you did not relieve this and you put too much pressure here, when you try to dorsiflex the hallux, it won't actually go. It actually stops. In order for the hallux to dorsiflex, you have to plantar flex the first ray. Look at the difference in the range of motion in that toe when we allow the first ray to plantar flex. So even if you didn't have a person with this particular problem, you do want to always consider your first ray mechanics when making the device. So let's go ahead and look at the condition of his midfoot. Are you relaxed? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we're going to test and see if his midfoot locks and unlocks. And it kind of stays locked the whole time, again, making this foot a poor shock absorber. Another thing that I'd like to point out here is these tendons, and you can see that they're kind of tented up and the toes are dorsiflexed. What this is a tightening of the tendons on the top of the foot and a weakening of the intrinsic foot muscles. He probably has not had this his whole life. It probably used to look a little bit more flat. I don't know if that's true. So in this case, one of the things you're also going to want to do is stretch out these tight tendons on the top and then give him the intrinsic foot strengthening exercises like the towel scrunches and picking up marbles, the arch ups, the toega. So anyway, just a little aside there for this biomechanic exam. That isn't something that we're necessarily going to handle with the orthotics, but we are going to handle it in physical therapy. So now let's look at the amount of ankle dorsiflexion and the motion in the ankle and the subtalar joint. He's pretty good there with the dorsiflexion on both. And then if we dorsiflex the ankle fully and grab the calcaneus, we can check the subtalar motion. That's one that actually just takes a lot of experience feeling. And once you've felt a lot of them, you'll start to feel what normal is. It's a small motion, so it's one of those things that's kind of hard to tell. And this ankle has a little bit less subtalar motion than this one, but I believe, is this the one that you broke? Yeah, it is. And so then that's probably one of the reasons why this old fracture still feels a little funny, because he could actually use a little work on his subtalar joint on that side. Let's look now at the position of the first met head in relationship to the others. So we're looking at the position of the first ray with respect to the lessers. And it's really important that you just let your fingers sink to the bones and not actually move the foot so that we can tell what the position is. You don't want to be twisting around and distorting what you're seeing. And so he does have a slight plantar flexed first ray with the left one a little bit more than the right. And on the biomechanic exam form, there are, each one of these things is listed. The biomechanic exam form from different labs have different amounts of information. I happen to like Biomechanical Services located in Arizona. So each time we're measuring these things, we can put them down there. Now we're looking at the toes, whether he's got a Morton's toe, which means the second toe is longer than the first, and he does. You would also note whether the toes are contracted, and they are kind of contracted. They don't have a contracture, but they are contracted. But he does not have the hallux abductovalgus or the bunion deformity. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the foot in semi-weight bearing and weight bearing. So the next thing we're going to do is look at how much subtalar pronation or how much the arch drops when he goes from non-weight bearing to weight bearing. And you can see in non-weight bearing he does have a really high arch. So go ahead and stand up. And now we're going to look at how much the arch dropped. Now you can actually measure this if you mark the navicular, and you can check it before and after standing. So let's go ahead and do that. Go ahead and sit down. And you're going to find your bony landmark and make a mark on it. I usually like to use my biomechanic exam form. I'll mark where it is and write my right foot, and then go ahead and stand up. And then we're going to look again, and we're going to mark where it dropped to. And that does drop over a centimeter, so he is actually getting some motion through the midfoot, even though it doesn't look too much like it. You want to make sure, though, I think you're probably posing it a little bit up for the camera. Yeah, you want to make, stop it. You want to make sure that the person's foot is flat. People tend to want to help you and make sure that they don't change your measurement by twisting their foot up in order to help you. Okay, so go ahead and stand up now. And then another thing that I like to do is to kind of play with it. Feel where subtalar neutral is, and then go ahead and just let your foot go. Great. So you can see how much the foot pronates when he lets it go, and that is normal, a normal amount of motion for shock absorption. And then go ahead and spin around facing away from us. The next thing we're going to look is how much the calcaneus changes in position from standing. You may like to have the calcaneus bisected before he stands here. We haven't done that today, but so you're going to look and see if the heel is in alignment with the leg and how much so. So now go ahead and do a little mini squat, and come on back up. And you can see that he gets a small amount of calcaneal eversion when he does a mini squat, but he has very little calcaneal eversion now. So the next thing we're going to do with a pen is look and see if his legs are straight. Go ahead and spin around and face the camera and put your ankles together. And so you're just looking to see whether he's got genu varum or genu valgum, and he has some nice straight legs, so we're not going to worry about that. Sometimes if you have a pronated foot and a genu varum, you can see that you've got two forces that would be fighting each other, and then you have a little bit bigger job to do with your orthotics. So go ahead and lay down on your stomach. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to bisect the calf and the calcaneus. A lot of people will tend to have their feet rotated out like this. You can either pick up the leg and position it, or you can have them lay in the figure 4 position, which will put them in the proper position for you. And now you're going to sink your fingers until you hit bone. I got to fuzz your eyes and mark the point halfway in between. If somebody has a large bony overgrowth, you'll want to stay away from that. Go high and go low below it. Then we're going to do the same thing to the distal tib fib. Get to the bone, fuzz your eyes, mark halfway in between. Then we're going to join our lines. Then I try to not look. The inside hand is the one that goes on the subtalar joint, the outside hand on the base of the fifth. And so I try to not look, get them in subtalar neutral, and then look down, so that way you're not cheating, seeing your lines and trying to make them parallel. And then you're going to see, are your lines either in line or parallel, in order to see when they're in subtalar neutral, is the foot on a good position with the leg, and that's good. He passes that one. And then the next thing we're going to look is what the alignment of the forefoot is to the calcaneus. So we're going to keep him in subtalar neutral, which I'm doing by holding the base of the fifth. And then without deviating the forefoot too much, look from the top. You can use your pen if you like to angle it up and see if these two are on a 90-degree angle. It's possible that the forefoot has a varus or a valgus, and you're going to want to note that. And he's pretty much on a 90-degree angle, so we're not going to call anything with that. So again, we're going to bisect the calcaneus. You smush your fingers until you hit bone, avoiding the bony overgrowth or the Hagelin's deformity. Again, on tib fib, we're going to do the same thing. Relax your foot. Once we have our marks, we're going to join them. Then, without looking, we're going to put them in subtalar neutral. And then look and see if our lines line up. And they look pretty good. And then we're going to look at the angle of the forefoot. And it is nice and perpendicular. Very good. So that's the end of the biomechanic exam. So now we're ready to cast. I like using the plaster cast in non-weight bearing because I want to have the foot in the exact perfect position. Some people like to use the foam trays that you step in. The foam trays might be good for a foot that deforms a lot when it hits the ground, but in general it's much harder to get an accurate representation of the bottom of the foot from the foam tray. And then 3D scanning is also an awesome way to get to capture the foot, as long as you're not doing it in weight bearing. If you're measuring the foot or scanning the foot when you're in weight bearing, naturally the foot is going to be in an altered position. You could, if that's all you have is a camera that is measuring in weight bearing, you could put them in subtalar neutral manually and still get a pretty good capture. And so again, I like using the plaster because I can hold the foot in exactly the position I want. This is a patient that I've been working with and talking to. I know what their problems are. I know if they're going to be able to tolerate the high arch or a low arch or only a low arch, and where I need to perhaps angle their foot in a special way. But in this case, we're just going to hold them straightforward in subtalar neutral. The wetter and hotter you get the plaster, the faster it sets up. And of course, we always want to be fast. So we're not worried about the position of the foot right now. We're just getting our plaster going. Remember that they're going to pour plaster into this slipper cast, or they may actually 3D scan it when it gets to the lab. That's becoming more and more common these days. So you want to be sure that you get a nice, deep enough cast. This I'm just making a nice little handle so that when it's dry I can pull it off of his foot. You really want to work it in so that you know that you haven't got any bubbles and you're going to get a nice full representation of the foot. I do like making sure that the cast captures the forefoot. A lot of people are just into posting the rear foot. I like posting the forefoot as well. So once again, we're going to get them in subtalar neutral, trying not to deform the foot. I usually don't like to continue to hold the base of the fifth. Maybe many of you have probably learned that when you learned how to do this. But once I get them in subtalar neutral, I just kind of use a lot of muscle and hold the foot in subtalar neutral with my inside hand instead. And I'm just going to let it sit up like this. It can actually be a little uncomfortable for the patient as well, because I am having to put a little bit of force on the front of the ankle in order to hold it in subtalar neutral. So now we're going to let this set up. So now the slipper cast is dry. You'll want to start taking it off from the heel. If it starts to collapse a little bit, it's not dry enough. So then just put it back on and smooth it out and wait for a little bit longer. But it does have a little bit of suction, so you're going to pop it off from the heel. Takes a little bit of wiggling to get it off from the toes, and then you have the nice representation of the foot. And patients love seeing these, of course, when you're done with them. Okay, so those are the slipper casts. So now we have our slipper casts. It's one of the fun things to do with these is actually to look at your calcaneal bisection and hold it vertical. And if somebody's got a real strong forefoot varus, you can see that. This guy was pretty good foot, except for how high the arch is. Now, high arch isn't a bad foot. It just, each foot type has its different problems, and this particular video is just focusing on the high arch foot. But a high arch foot is usually a fast foot because it doesn't have as much side-to-side motion to do. So as we saw from the pressure data from his foot scan, that he's getting a lot of pressure on the fifth met head. And so what we're going to do is we're going to mark this for the lab that we want to relieve the fifth met head. We also know from our biomechanic exam that he's getting a lot of pressure on the first. So we're going to also make sure that we do a first ray cutout with the fill-in there. So we're going to relieve pressure on this and do a first ray cutout with fill-in on that. And as far as the rest goes, we're just going to make sure that they contour the arch. This is a foot that needs shock absorption. So we're going to go with a lighter shell that will give a little bit more flex. We don't want a hard carbon graphite for this foot. We do want to decrease the amount of force that he gets through the midfoot, but we do want to still allow the arch to fall and get some subtalar pronation. So once you have completed your prescription, you've told the lab what you would like done with the positive, you've got your cast marked if it needs to be marked, and you're all set to mail it off. So that's how to do a biomechanic exam with the specific information on a high arch foot. If you like this video, please subscribe. Check us out on Facebook. Check out our website. And we have locations in both Northern Virginia and Virginia Beach.